Okay, let's walk through a quick installation of Windows Server 2022 with the desktop experience. Now, this is really similar to installing Server 2019 or previous versions of Server with the desktop experience. In fact, I debated about whether I should do another video or not, but it's been a while since I've updated this, so let's go ahead and run through it real quick. So I've already created my virtual machine and it's sitting on my screen here. I'm going to start my virtual machine. Oh, before I do that, note that I have added the ISO as a DVD drive. So I'm going to start and it's going to boot from that and it's going to give me the option right here, press any key to boot. Now, if I do not do that, then it'll not boot from the CD and it'll error and I'll have to power down the system and restart it. But just hit any key there and we're going to start. We'd select the language, the time and currency format, and then what keyboard or input method that we're using. Normally these you can pretty much leave alone. Click next and then repair your computer. There's some options here for repairing a server that is not booting. If you have that issue, sometimes you can boot off of an install media, be it, in this case, an ISO file, or burn it to a DVD or whatever. But if you can boot from here, you have some repair options. We don't have that issue. We're doing a fresh install on, in this case, VM, but it would do the same thing if we were doing a bare metal install. So I'm going to click Install Now. This will launch the setup application. And there'll be a handful of questions that we'll go through. Here's going to be your first one. What are we installing? Now, I am using, for my install media, I'm using the evaluation ISO that I downloaded from Microsoft. So if you want to play with it, just do a quick Google search or whatever your favorite search engine is, for Windows Server 2022 evaluation. And you can download it as an ISO or a VHD or whatever. I downloaded it as an ISO file. And so it's giving me these four options. Because I haven't purchased it in its eval, I can choose whether I want Standard Edition or Data Center Edition. And then the default, so this is your default one right here, is without the desktop experience, so no GUI. Now, if you install this without a GUI, you cannot come back and add a GUI to it later. On the flip side, if you install it with the GUI, you can't really take that out. There used to be, in a previous version of Windows, an option to jump back and forth. Now you can't. So what you choose is kind of what you're committed to. And for this instance, I want my desktop experience. We'll talk more later about why you might not want to use a desktop experience and install it without a GUI. So I'm going to click next. We'll talk about that in another video, I think. I want to accept the Microsoft software license and click next. Now, again, Microsoft's default assumption is you are going to be upgrading, and that's what this is. I would do this if it was not a start from scratch install. So if I had a previous existing version of Windows Server, I just wanted to bump it up to the latest version, that's what I would do. Since that's not, and I'm doing a install from nothing, then we're going to do a custom install. Now here I can divide up disk space however I want. Now I went with the default when I created this. I have 127 gig dynamically expanding disk. And if I click next, then it just uses that entire disk, creates a volume using the entire unallocated space, and that becomes the C drive in Windows, and that's my boot partition. Now I can refresh if it didn't find all of my available drives. If I have a drive attached on a controller that Windows doesn't recognize, I can use my load driver right here, and I can load another driver and hopefully get Windows to recognize the controller and then recognize the drive that's on that. The times I've had to do that has been if I'm working with off-the-wall third-party RAID controllers. Standard RAID controllers from well-known manufacturers, Microsoft is typically going to have drivers built in, but sometimes for a off-the-wall RAID controller or hard drive controller, they might not. So that's where you would use that. If I had previously used this hard drive for other things, there might be existing partitions on it or existing volumes, and I might need to delete those. I can also extend a volume if there is one on it. If there is one on it that I want to just wipe out, I have the option to format it. I can also create new volumes. And typically you would do this if you wanted, let's say, an operating system volume and a data volume. Some people will do that sometimes. I have never found that particularly helpful. I tend to run out of space on my operating system volume faster than I run out of space on my data volume. So I tend to leave them all together, although some people really like to separate that out. If I'm going to separate them out, I like to do it honestly on different physical disks, which gives me a little more of a performance increase. So I'm going to use the entire thing for the operating system, so I'm just going to click Next. That will take all of that and it will allocate all of that space, create a volume, and here it starts working on it. Copying the server operating system files, getting files ready for installation, then we're going to install features, we're going to install updates, we're going to finish up. It's going to run through all of these. I'm just going to give you a little percentage here. This is the one that takes the longest. It's going to give you a little percentage here of how far we've come, and it'll check them off as we go through. At this point, rather than just sitting here and watching grass grow, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. It'll get through all of these, and then when it goes on to the next step, then I'll go ahead and resume the video and we'll continue from there. Okay, so it just got done with that particular phase, and it tells me here that we are going to restart automatically in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown, and we reboot. So that's the first phase, is getting the operating system installed. Now it's going to reboot off of the new operating system. And when it goes to boot, depending on the hardware you're on, sometimes there's going to be enough of a delay that it tries to boot off the CD again. That was something that was an issue with previous versions of Windows. Now it's really not much of an issue. We just let it go and we are booting off of our hard drive. And you can see right here where it says getting ready, it's starting to configure the operating system that it just copied all the files over for. All right, so now let it finish coming back up. We're going to give it an administrative password. And finalizing our settings. Yes, I want to go ahead and connect to get my maximum screen resolution. Okay, and at this point, our server is up and running. Now, we're not actually doing anything with it yet. We do have some initial configuration options that I want to walk you through. So, operating system comes up. It goes to load an application called Server Manager. Amazing tool for managing your servers. Hence the name. And when it comes up, we will use that to perform our initial configuration. Now, before I do that, right here, finish catching up right here, introduces a Windows Admin Center. Now, the Windows Admin Center is a web-based tool that you can use to manage multiple devices within the same interface. And it's actually made a lot of progress from when it was initially released. So it is definitely worth looking at. It won't do everything that you need, but it will do a whole lot. And so it is a very, very useful tool. But we're not about that at the moment. So I'm going to say don't show this message again and close it. All right. We can take another look at Server Manager in more detail a little bit later on, or I have other videos on our YouTube channel if you want to check them out. And it hasn't really changed much in the last couple of server iterations. So let's talk about configuring this local server. So first thing we're going to need to do is set the computer name. There are certain things that if you do them, like promoting it to a domain controller, you cannot change the computer name after doing that. It creates major, major problems if you try. So best practice is change it right away in your initial server configuration. So I'm going to click on my computer name. And this is not the name, this is a description. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to say change. And here's where I can change the name, and here's where I can add it to a domain. Not adding it to a domain yet. It's actually going to be a domain controller here in a few minutes. So I'm going to set the computer name, and let's just call this demo server because I don't feel creative at the moment. And I'm going to click OK. Now, That change is going to require the system to reboot in order for that change to take effect. So I'm going to say, yep, I understand that. I hit OK. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And it says, do you want to restart now? I don't actually want to restart later because there's a couple of other things I want to talk about before we do this. But I've been bitten a few times by doing other things and then forgetting to change the computer name and having to come back and deal with it later. So I'm going to say restart later. And you'll notice that hasn't taken effect yet. So Windows Defender Firewall is on. I'm currently on a public network. That's fine. I think I've got the VM connected to I think I've got it connected to the default switch. So remote management is enabled. Remote desktop I currently have disabled. That's a default. All of these are defaults. This is something you might want to change if you use remote desktop for managing your servers. NIC teaming is disabled. We'll talk about that later. Real quick overview. It's taking multiple network cards and tying them together into one virtual network card. Update information, Microsoft Windows Defender antivirus, feedback and diagnostic settings, the IE enhanced security configuration. This only impacts Internet Explorer. Any other web browser is not impacted by this. It's turned on. It can be kind of annoying because it basically doesn't trust anything. And the idea is you shouldn't be searching or browsing the internet from your server most of the time anyway. So they turn that on, but again, that only impacts IE. So Edge is not impacted by that. Mozilla Firefox is not impacted by that. Chrome is not impacted by that. You can set the time, and I did not activate this with product ID. So the one thing I'm going to want to take a look at here is my IP address. So I'm going to click on my IP address and right-click on Ethernet and go to Properties. And if I remember correctly, I did this yesterday, so I'm trusting my memory here. We're going to set IPv4 and I'm going to go to Properties. Now, by default, it's set to obtain an IP address in a DNS server automatically. Okay, that's fine. Except that I want this thing to use itself. I want it to obtain an IP address automatically because I'm in Hyper-V. The default switch is going to give me access to the internet if I need it for updates and things like that. Or to download additional software, update my help from PowerShell, things to that effect. So I do want to pull an IP address from that DHCP server on my switch. In a actual network, I probably want to pull this from my existing DHCP server. Or if this is the first machine that's coming up in a network, then I'm going to want to give it a static IP address. In fact, most servers, eventually I'm going to want to give them a static IP address anyway. But for the moment, I'm going to go ahead and leave this. I am, however, going to make this thing a domain controller, which means it has to use itself as a DNS server. So I'm going to say use the following DNS server, and I'm going to give it an address of 127.0.0.1. That's going to be my loopback address. So basically it's saying whatever you choose to use, whatever you get assigned, not you choose to use, whatever you get assigned as an IP address, go ahead and use that. Talk to yourself. It's a loopback. Use that as your DH or DNS server. So I'm going to say, yep. And then I'm going to double check real quick. I'm going to go to my command prompt. And I'm going to type ipconfig. Maybe I did put this thing on a private network. I'm going to just double check this real quick. So I'm going to restore it in. I'm going to go to File, Settings, and my network adapter, I did put it on my isolated network. Okay, in that case, let's go ahead. It means I'm not going to have internet access unless I change that. But it also means I'm going to assign a static IP address. And let's do a 172.16.1.10, 255.255.255.0, and I'm going to give it a default gateway even though it doesn't really exist. .1.1. Just so you can see how we do it. Now, at this point, by the way, if you don't give it a default gateway, it'll go ahead and take the rest of it. As I just tab down through to the OK and hit my spacebar to select that. It will go ahead and take it. So, again, notice I can try to refresh here. That should refresh this, but the computer name hasn't changed yet. Remember, that doesn't take effect until I reboot. So, let me go ahead and maximize that and power and restart. Restart anyway. So we'll let that come up. We'll see that our changes have taken effect. Yes, I would like to reconnect. There we go. Maximize that. Log in. And at this point, my server should be configured at its initial configuration anyway, and ready for me to start adding roles, features, or functions onto it. Go to configure this local server, and we're going to see demo server. We're in a work group. Here's our IP address. Okay, our configuration is done, and we're ready to start working with our server.